vision, their film, their hope, and their lives to the transformation of their country. I don't pretend to be an expert on Brazil. I am not. I care about Brazil deeply. I care about the people of Brazil, the women of Brazil who are experiencing femicide, the people in the favelas, the indigenous, the Black young people suffering genocide, the actors, the singers, the filmmakers, the activists. I still, like many, mourn the murder of Marielle Franco and will not rest until there is justice. I care about democracy in Brazil. It's the largest country in all of Latin America. It's the fourth largest democracy in the world. Its beauty lies in the rich diversity of its culture and people. My frame of reference has always been through the lens of the vagina. The first time I ever visited Brazil was for the Vagina Monologues, which I am proud to say has been running for more than 19 years in Rio. I had the privilege of being there on opening night, and I have to tell you, it was the most outrageous, original, brave, and sexual interpretation of the show I have ever seen. It was directed by the fabulous Miguel Falabella, and I've been back a few times since then. What's happened in Brazil over the last few years and what's happening now is deeply concerning and should be of great interest to everyone here in the United States. Brazil has been a democracy since 1985. This happened 20 years after the coup d'etat in 1964, backed by the United States, by the way, that established a repressive military government instituting extreme censorship, state-driven terrorism, responsible for torturing thousands and killing hundreds of people. Caetano Veloso was one of the victims, censored, imprisoned, and exiled. That military lasted over 21 years. But after democracy was reestablished, Brazil flourished. 26 million people rose out of poverty and misery. In the years of Lula da Silva, a union worker who rose to presidency in 2002, Brazil's structural inequality diminished significantly, and the country left the hunger map. Lula was also one of the most popular leaders in the world. His successor, Dilma Rousseff, suffered a misogynist impeachment, which many call a parliamentary coup. A corrupt judiciary system engineered Lula's imprisonment while he was the most popular candidate for the election. This laid the path for Jair Bolsonaro, an authoritarian misogynist who has escalated homophobia and transphobia. What is most disheartening is his unapologetic destruction, plundering, and burning of the Amazon for profit, and the killing of indigenous people who have been stewards to the Amazon for centuries. He once said, and I quote, "Brazil was a country every foreigner pervert desires." And basically, subtext, she belongs to us, and we're gonna rape her ourselves. In the age of strong men, worldwide, the connection between the abuse of women's bodies and the body of the earth become more and more evident. The lethal combination of erasure of law, escalating fake news, a widespread conservative media, misogyny, homophobia, transphobia, corruption, and destruction of the earth should ring bells for all of us here and should awaken our attention. There is so much we can learn from what happened and what is happening in Brazil. And secondly, Brazil needs our solidarity. Every person who is speaking here tonight has been a serious point of reference for my understanding and love of Brazil, and I'm sure that is true for you. I have been a long-time fan of Caetano Veloso, and I can't believe I just got to meet him, to be perfectly honest. His music and spirit have stood as inspiration for me and millions around the world. He is a world treasure. Please welcome Caetano Veloso. Célia Xakriabá is an indigenous educator, activist, and feminist of the Xakriabá people of Brazil. She has fought for the rights of indigenous women, indigenous land rights, and indigenous education. She is a strong critic of the government of Bolsonaro, and her outspokenness has put her life at risk. And please welcome Ana Bahita, who will be translating for her. Pulitzer Prize winner Glenn Greenwald will be here right now on video conference. He currently lives in Brazil, and he has done some of the most groundbreaking journalism for decades. Most recently, exposing the coordinated efforts of the judiciary system to imprison Lula. His life is currently at great risk, and we welcome you, Glenn. Thank you for being here. Finally, it is Petra Costa who is the reason I'm here, and Caetano said the same thing for him. Her extraordinary film, Edge of Democracy, already chosen, by the way, by the New York Times, is one of the best films of the year, is a brilliant... It's a brilliant, personal, political, lyrical journey through the political realm of Brazil. But what's so amazing about this film is it comes straight from her heart and is done with such poetry and grace. It moved me deeply, it educated me, it pushed me to do more, to care more, and to be honest with you, to be here tonight. So please welcome everyone. I'm going to ask all of the people here one question, and each one will answer through their particular lens. I'm going to ask them to keep it to 5 minutes. The first person we're going to begin with is Célia. What is happening in Brazil, and how did we get here?
Boa noite para todos. É bem importante dizer que o que está acontecendo no Brasil não pode ser entendido exatamente como uma fake news que começa em 2018, porque as pessoas se sentem assustadas e dizem, como assim a fake news de 2018 que decide as eleições? E ninguém nunca faz a pergunta, uma reflexão profunda, que a primeira fake news da história, na verdade, foi quando invadiu o Brasil e continua sendo reproduzida, que quem descobriu o Brasil foi Pedro Álvares Cabral.
So, good evening, everyone. It's very important to understand how we are so far right now in Brazil. So we need to understand that it's not only about fake news, but it's much beyond that. And one of the biggest fake news about Brazil is that it was discovered by a European man called Pedro Álvares Cabral.
E a segunda fake news de dizer que os povos indígenas não foram torturados na época da ditadura. E é preciso entender que foram mais de 8.000 povos indígenas que foram torturados na época da ditadura. Porque não apenas torturaram nossas lideranças, estruparam nossas mulheres indígenas. Isso é a sociedade, a formação da sociedade brasileira.
The second fake news is that during the dictatorship, people believed that the indigenous people in Brazil were not tortured. So more than 8,000 people were tortured and raped during the history of Brazil and during the dictatorship.
Então, o que acontece hoje no Brasil é a herança do processo, do projeto de colonização que tentou arrancar, amputar o direito dos povos indígenas. E hoje é preciso dizer que nós, povos indígenas, estamos sendo mortos, torturados, não apenas com a arma do calibre 38. Nós estamos sendo torturados com a arma do calibre 17, que é a arma do PSL e do atual governo.
So it is important to understand the colonization project in Brazil and how this affects indigenous people.
Depois dela.
Sim, Glenn. Sorry, I got lost. So indigenous people are not only be killed by guns, but they also be killed by one specific gun, that is the 17 gun, which is the number of the Bolsonaro party.
E nós vamos continuar lutando porque não lutar exatamente com a mesma arma de fogo não significa que nós estamos desarmadas. Nós vamos lutar com a arma mais potente que nós povos indígenas, nós mulheres indígenas temos hoje. Nós vamos lutar com o nosso corpo e com a força de nosso espírito, que é da nossa ancestralidade.
And it is important to understand that indigenous people is not that we are unarmed. We are armed with our body, our spirit, and our ancestral knowledge.
Nós vamos seguir fazendo luta, porque a cada vez que queima a Amazônia, também queima os corpos das mulheres dos povos indígenas. A cada vez que coloca fogo na Amazônia, é o mesmo fogo que tem incendiado também as nossas casas de reza. Porque o que ele tem medo mesmo é da nossa resistência e da força da espiritualidade dos povos indígenas.
That's a lot. Very powerful. So it's important to understand that every time that they are burning the Amazon, they think that they are burning the indigenous people. They think that they are burning our houses, but they are afraid of our resistance. They are afraid of our bodies. They are afraid of the bodies of the indigenous people in Brazil.
Nós, povos indígenas, nós dizemos que nós somos o termômetro do mundo. Nós contribuímos para reduzir as mudanças climáticas. Já o atual governo significa a convulsão, a febre mais alta. E nós somos a temperatura porque o dia que enxergar e ver que nós, povos indígenas, paramos de respirar, a humanidade também já não vai conseguir respirar mais.
We indigenous people are the indicators of the world. We are the land defenders. When indigenous people stop to breathe, this world will also stop to breathe.
Salvar a Amazônia, salvar o Cerrado, salvar todos os biomas, significa responder uma palavra profunda. Quem tem território tem o quê? Quem tem território tem lugar para onde voltar. Quem tem território tem colo, tem mãe, e quem tem mãe tem cura.
When we have land, when we have territory, we have a home. We have a place to go, we have a mother, and we are healed.
Por isso que nós defendemos o território com a nossa vida. E nós temos feito uma pergunta profunda, que o capitalismo, o latifúndio, o agronegócio e mesmo a universidade só vai reconhecer e considerar a potência de nossos territórios, de nossos corpos indígenas, o dia que não existir mais nenhuma árvore. Porque o dia que não existir mais nenhuma árvore, nós quer bem saber aonde que vai escrever essa caneta. Por isso que nós continuamos muito mais aprendendo com a árvore viva do que com papel morto.
That's why we keep defending our territory, and we fight against the agribusiness. Sorry. It's a very poetical thing, so I'm trying to say we learn. That's how when the society, the academia, we understand that a live tree is more important than a dead paper. And that's what we are fighting for. We fight for our land, we fight for our ancestors, and we need to understand the indigenous people are the ones that are fighting for the world, for the nature.
Thank you, Célia. Petra?
Thank you. It's really an honor to be here tonight, accompanied by these prophets. I studied here at Columbia, Barnard College, many years ago. and to return here at this moment where we're living all a catastrophic political landscape, not just in the United States, but in Brazil and in many countries around the world, is very significant. I grew up with my mother wearing a t-shirt that had written, "Give me democracy or give me death." And I believed, growing up, that democracy was my birthright. My parents fought for 10 years against the military dictatorship in Brazil. Many of their friends were killed and tortured. And democracy and I kind of were born at the same time. Like many of us, I took it for granted. I believe it was there to stay and progress slowly but surely. But in 2016, we were proven wrong. And of course, it comes from centuries of slavery, inequality, feminicide, misogyny. But these things seem to have been slowly but surely diminishing. How does it suddenly escalate? Is it a last gasp of the white men? It's definitely a gasp of despair. I think they know that feminism is here to stay, that people of color are not going to let go of their rights and of what was conquered through so many decades, and they are desperate. They're desperate because they're losing their political base, they're losing their voters, and that's what I discovered in making this film. The reason why I started making this film was I went to the streets one day to film a protest in Copacabana, and what I saw there was so terrifying that I entered into a rabbit hole that took 3 years of my life. In that rabbit hole, the first thing I saw were thousands of Brazilians dressed in the colors of the Brazilian flag, singing nationalistic anthems, many of them asking for the return of the military. I never thought I was going to see that. I never thought that after 30 years there would be people asking for the return of a terrorist government that killed hundreds of people and tortured so many. But they're still asking today. They think it will solve systemic problems that are actually just augmenting with the return of many military to power in Brazil today. We then went into the Congress and spent 6 months filming the impeachment process. And what was terrifying about the impeachment process is that 60% of the congressmen, most of them white and men, were impeaching a woman for a crime that they didn't know what was the crime. It was like very much Kafka's The Trial, where you spend 6 months trying to figure out what was the crime that everyone was talking about. And it was fiscal makeup, which is basically budget maneuvering to hide deficit. While many of those men, 60% of them, were themselves accused of money laundering, bribery, some of them even slavery and murder. By the end of those 6 months, Dilma was impeached, and then Lula went to prison, and Bolsonaro rose to power. The rest is history. But I think what I conclude from all this is that Brazil did not deal with its memory. Brazil did not deal with the centuries of slavery that formed it. It did not deal with the atrocities committed during the military dictatorship. And whenever we don't deal with our past, it comes back to haunt us.
Thank you, Petra. Glenn, can you hear me?
Hey, everybody. It's so great to be with you there. I feel a little bit odd because Caetano and Petra, both Brazilians, are there with you. And I, on the other hand, am here in Brazil, but I guess that's just the world that we live in. Before I begin, just wanted to say that I'm on some kind of a delay with the sound that's in my ear, so I'm actually watching the Media Ninja live feed on Facebook, and I'm hearing it that way, and I think it's about 50 seconds to a minute behind. So if I wave or if I laugh at jokes a minute after it actually happens, it's not because I've gone temporarily insane. It's because I'm hearing things on delay, and I'm reacting when I hear it. So I'm so thrilled to be part of a panel with people whose work I so greatly admire, and that's true of all the people who are sitting on the stage in front of you. I really wish I could be there. But I wanted to just devote my remarks to the events of the last few years. And obviously, the last 4 months for me have been somewhat occupied with a very particular kind of journalism, one that I think has had enduring impact on the history of Brazilian democracy, one that has been devoted to proving that the superhero that a lot of Brazilians thought that they had, in fact, was nothing of the kind, that far from being some sort of pious crusader against corruption, Sergio Moro, in fact, all along was a massive fraud and a charlatan and one of the country's most corrupt political officials. And as I think about the last 4 years and the last 5 years and what an effect he and similarly corrupt and dishonest frauds and charlatans have had on the trajectory of Brazilian democracy, I often think back to the thing that people ask me the most about these days, which is what is the difference between the reporting I've been doing over the last 4 months and the reporting that I did 6 years ago in the case of the documents furnished to me by my heroic source, Edward Snowden, that allowed us to report on how the US government and its allies was spying on pretty much the entire world, including large parts of Brazilian society, the Brazilian population, Brazilian institutions, Brazilian political officials. And usually when people ask me that, the assumption is that the two cases are wildly distinct. And of course, there are really significant differences between them, but I do think there's a through line that one can draw between that work and the work that we've been doing over the last 4 months in what seems to be a much different context, which is that a major part of the reporting that we were able to do back then was about how the US was doing things like spying on Brazilian politicians such as then President Dilma Rousseff and spying on Brazilian institutions such as Petrobras. And I don't think it's really a coincidence that shortly after that, after all that spying was being done on Dilma and on Petrobras, Lava Jato began with a focus on Petrobras, and shortly thereafter with a targeted attempt driven in large part by Lava Jato, as we now know, to remove the elected president. And I remember one of the most pressing and significant moments for me was in 2016 in the middle of the impeachment debate over Dilma when I interviewed former President Lula da Silva. And I remember something in 2016 that he said to me. It was like the first interview he'd given in many months about the impeachment. And we were talking about the absurdity of the impeachment of an honest politician being led by the likes of actual gangsters and criminals such as Eduardo Cunha and Alessio Neves and Michel Temer. And what Lula said to me at the time that I highlighted right away, but I think it turned out to be so much more prescient than certainly I realized, and I would bet that he realized. He said that the reason why impeachment is such a terrible idea is because, and this is obviously coming from somebody, as he said, who grew up for a long time in an undemocratic state, who fought and risked so much, as did Dilma, to bring about democracy to Brazil, that when you start dismantling the mechanisms of democracy, even if you think you have a good reason to do so, what comes next, inevitably, is always worse. It's always worse. And I think that impeachment of Dilma ended up being just the first step on the road to Bolsonarism, the second step being the imprisonment of Lula, the third step being the reverence created by the Brazilian media for Lava Jato. I think all of it embedded into the popular Brazilian mind, and certainly among the Brazilian elites, the idea that if you have a societal problem, the solution doesn't lie any longer within the democratic process. It doesn't lie within, if you believe PT is a problem, trying to remove PT from office using the ballot box. The solution, taught Brazilian elites to the Brazilian populace with impeachment and the imprisonment of Lula and the reverence for Lava Jato, lies with undemocratic means. And that, I think, laid the foundation for somebody like Jair Bolsonaro, who has spent his whole career justly on the political fringes for praising anti-democratic frameworks and praising the military dictatorship, to become legitimate, to be swept into the mainstream. That if even Brazilian elites on Globo and elsewhere are telling us that we can remove the elected official who's president when we dislike her, we can put another elected official in prison because we don't like him and he may win the election, that the solutions lie outside of the democratic process, that is what ushers in an anti-democratic tyrant like Jair Bolsonaro. And I guess the only point to conclude, and then we can kind of have this further discussion about Lava Jato and the impact that it's having. But the other point that I wanted to make is about the road to Bolsonaro, is that it's not a coincidence that it was in 2016 that I created the Intercept Brazil. And my primary impetus for doing it at the time was the fact that as somebody who has lived in this country for almost 15 years, I was actually shocked, notwithstanding what a low opinion I had of the Brazilian media, about how little dissent was permitted when it came to a debate as momentous as whether or not Brazilian democracy ought to remove the elected president, something that is as momentous and grave as a democracy can do. And the idea at the time in creating the Intercept Brazil was that there was a lot of great independent Brazilian media, but there wasn't real adversarial journalism that was well-funded, that would sustain a full newsroom of the kind that Brazil needed. And I don't think there's anything in my life that I'm more proud of than the fact that I've been able to give back to Brazil, a country I love so much, that has given me everything in my life, a newsroom that now does the kind of adversarial, truly independent journalism that I think Brazilian democracy needs more than anything to survive, filled with young Brazilian journalists who have done such courageous journalism. So thank you so much. Sorry about the delay, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion tonight.
Thank you so much, Glenn. Really, thank you. Caetano?
Well, I'm an old man. Differently from Petra, I was born much before the dictatorship began in 1965. I think that all things that are happening are the result, organic result, of the violent punch of the colonial expansion that came from Europe. This is a huge, enormous thing in the history of humanity, and the left will never really deal with things that must be dealt with if it doesn't equate socialism, equalitarianism with the confrontation of slavery. It's something that I have thought many times in my life, you know, and because I had colleagues who were Marxists in the university, in college, and in my family too, left-wing, leaned people. I always had this question in my mind: what did Marx said or wrote in the 19th century about slavery, about African slavery? The number, 3 centuries of importing black people to work for plantations, for sugarcane fields, and tobacco, and cotton, and domestic work, whatever, and how this has survived, you know. So when the coup d'etat came in 1964, I felt that deep anguish, you know, like things are more difficult than they seem to be. And what is happening in Brazil now is, to answer your first question, is that the president said that he envies American cavalry because American cavalry decimate all the Native Americans, all the Indians, as he says, and the Brazilian didn't do it. So this, for me, represents the nucleus of the ideological thing that's going on in Brazil now. But it's a world thing, because you can see incredible things happening in America too, in the United States too, and in many parts of Europe and Asia. And in the past, we had this, I grew up in the Cold War. So we had this confrontation between the free world and the communist dictatorships. And I always asked myself, how can we be, you know, fighting for something that has only been put in practice through dictatorships, autocracies. And I didn't find the answer. But very recently, as an old man, I saw this young guy in the internet, a Brazilian guy from Pernambuco. He's 29, I think. He doesn't know me. I mean, I never met him. We never talked or anything. And his name is Jones Manuel. And he impressed me because he linked liberal democracy and capitalism to the history of slavery. In fact, liberalism itself was linked by him, who is inspired by an Italian thinker called Domenico Losurdo, who equates socialism with the overcoming of the history of slavery. And two things impressed me that in the French Revolution, there was a decision against slavery. And the French colonies in America had slave rebellions, with the example of Haiti, in which they won their fight. And the other thing is that in the communist countries in the 20th century, words very clear were said and written against slavery and racism. And the revolution that was really successful was the American Revolution, as compared to the French Revolution, which became terror and then open space for Napoleon and, and all things we know. And the American Revolution has this consistency. It's still going on. So I grew up admiring this and opposing this to the myth of the French Revolution. But in fact, in the French Revolution, they had a word against slavery and against racism. And this beautiful, strong, admirable country of yours was founded by intelligent people who owned slaves. And the first presidents of the United States, they all had slaves. Almost all of them had. The first ones did have, and many did have. And blacks have been under a prejudice, a social hierarchy, oppressive in this country and all over America, but here very organizedly, that after the Civil War kind of represented the nucleus of the meaning of slavery. And to respond to that, you have to be, really crazy, because it's a crazy thing. So reason is not enough. So I'd say that we need a second abolition of slavery, and Brazil being this enormous territory in America where people speak Portuguese, and to which the biggest number of black slaves were brought from Africa to the Americas. Brazil is a big problem, and it is also an enormous opportunity. I have the ambition. You have to be crazily ambitious. I have the ambition of seeing Brazil being the first big power, not imperialist, without the imperialism that's always been connected to the greatness of nations. And that would be the kingdom of the Holy Ghost. That I only dream of the kingdom of the Holy Ghost, as is in the verse of a Brazilian poet from the 1800s, Souza Andrade, that was critically rediscovered by the concrete poets from São Paulo. And in his verse, it said, I'll try to translate it into English. It's perfectly beautiful in Portuguese, but what he says is, no reino do Espírito Santo, tudo é coroado, Senhor. In the kingdom of the Holy Spirit, all or everyone is crowned Lord. So, that's why I cried in many moments when I saw Petra's movie.
Thank you so much. Before we go on to the next question, I just want to give everyone an opportunity. If there's something they heard that they want to respond to or anything, just say before we go on. Anyone? Petra?
Well, there's so much. I think it was very complimentary because Brazil was founded on the genocide that Célia so beautifully spoke about, and the fake news of a discovery that never happened because the land was already there. And then by the establishment of the most cruel institutionalized oppression, which was 3 centuries of slavery. And as I say in the film, which I don't know if it's clear, but it's something I discovered, which is that Brazil killed more slaves than were born, different from the United States that treated its slaves well enough so they would reproduce and therefore did not have to continue importing slaves continuously as Brazil. For me, the key to understanding the Brazilian elite is this thought process. It's cheaper to continue importing slaves than treating them well enough so that they will survive. And it's of such inhumanity that thought process can go through someone's mind. And I think it has to do so much with what has happened in the last few years in Brazil. As a woman I interview in the film says, I am here in the streets today against Dilma because it's absurd that Black people in Brazil have affirmative action and are getting the rights to get into university. This is racism against white people, she said. And that is not in the middle of Brazil, and like here it's in the Midwest, it's in the capital, São Paulo. Our capitals are where this right-wing white supremacy has its home. And so what Caetano is saying is at the root of our cancer. It will be only when we deal with that problem and we have a second abolition that we will regain democracy in Brazil.
And if I may, that is absolutely the case in the United States of America. Yeah. Do you want to add anything?
Oh, Glenn's dogs are agreeing as well.
Yeah, hold.
Glenn, we're glad your dog is with us.
My dogs get very excited whenever we talk about Brazilian democracy, so.
Para mim é muito importante estar com Caetano, Petra, exatamente nesse momento da história que nos une como semente também, porque pensar o processo da democracia hoje no Brasil é pensar que também não dá para curar o mal com a mesma enfermidade. E se não dá para curar o mal com a mesma enfermidade, é pensar que esse ataque à democracia, na verdade, vem também, eu digo que não exatamente de matriz colonizadora, mas de patriz, porque vem da herança do patriarcado.
It's very important to me to be here with Petra and Caetano tonight, and to think democracy in Brazil. It's not possible to think about a solution if we don't understand that the disease by itself will not help us, will not cure itself. And it's also important to understand that the root cause of all these diseases is patriarchy.
E ninguém se faz a pergunta, nunca vi ninguém perguntando de que cor é a democracia e se a democracia tem cor. Mas se nós for pensar e dar uma cor para a democracia minimamente tem que ser colorida, porque ela tem que ser da cor da diversidade.
And nobody asked what is the color of democracy. But if you ask me what is the color of democracy, I would tell you that it has to be colored, because that's what diversity means.
Democracia é nossa casa, e como é que nós vamos pensar em democracia? Não dá para pensar e defender uma democracia parcial. A democracia é também como pensar a luta, a dignidade dos povos indígenas. Porque se nossa casa está sendo atacada, como pensar em democracia? Então, a democracia precisa ser repensada em uma palavra muito mais profunda. O que significa Lula estar preso hoje? Significa, na verdade, também prender a democracia. Não dá para pensar em democracia se nossos corpos, nossas mentes continuam aprisionadas.
And we cannot defend partial democracy. Or we defend democracy, or we are not defending democracy. It's difficult to think about democracy when our dignity, our houses are being attacked. When we are attacking democracy, we are attacking our houses. When you look at the Lula situation now, that also means that, just a moment. So the prison of Lula also represents the prison of our democracy and of our liberty.
Glenn, do you want to add something? Wait, your sound's not on. 1 second.
Yeah, things work better when the microphone is on.
It's on now.
So I think that sometimes it's easy to forget what a shocking and horrifying development Jair Bolsonaro's election is, because he's now been in office for 10 months and the brain has a way of growing accustomed even to the most hideous realities. But I was actually thinking about, as I was listening to Caetano and Petra and Célia speak, that what the history actually was. And I was remembering the first time Bolsonaro really entered my radar screen as a journalist, which was in 2014, when he had told his colleague in the Congress, Maria do Rosario, for the second time, that she wasn't attractive enough to deserve his rape. And that was the first time he said it when I was living in Brazil, and it caused me to really look more into Bolsonaro's ideology and his statement of his history of statements. And it actually shocked me at the time that Brazil even had a member of Congress, let alone a president, who had this political and ideological background. And I wrote an article in English that was entitled "Meet the Most Homophobic, Misogynistic, and Racist Elected Official in the Democratic World," the purpose of which was to introduce to an English-speaking audience the fact that there was somebody just at one of 650 or 700 members of the Brazilian Congress who was as decadent and just and horrifying as Jair Bolsonaro. And I remember at the time, actually, my husband, David Miranda, who is now the only openly LGBT member of the Câmara, at the time was working with me as a journalist, and he did the interview with Bolsonaro for that article. And it was largely about what he had said to Maria do Rosario, but we also wanted to ask about what at the time was his main bill that he was advocating, which was a ban on same-sex couples being able to adopt children, even though there are 50,000 Brazilian children in shelters with no family. And at the time, David and I were thinking about adopting. We've since adopted 2 children, but it was something that was of a personal interest to us. And David asked then Congressman Bolsonaro why it was that he wanted to ban same-sex couples from adopting. And Bolsonaro said to him, once he realized that he was my husband, said, "Oh, look, you're a homosexual. That's why you're asking, but you don't need to worry because medical science is soon going to be able to implant a uterus in you. So if you want to have a baby, you can just have a baby biologically," which is utterly bizarre. Like, no scientist or doctor has even, I don't know where his brain produced that from, but it was indicative of just how far outside of just the realm of decency and just basic stability he was, let alone anything that was politically healthy. And then I had a discussion in 2017 when it became apparent that Bolsonaro was going to run for president with a very respected political scientist whose opinions I really have a high regard for. And he said to me, and I agreed with him at the time, "Look, obviously nobody thinks," he said, "that Bolsonaro can win and become president. The concern is, what if he gets 8% or 10% of the vote, and then the president who does win is forced to give him something like the Ministry of Defense or some other ministry that's powerful? Imagine how scary that would be." So that was in 2017. That wasn't even 10 years ago. That was maybe 18 months ago. The idea of Jair Bolsonaro being the president was utterly unthinkable. And I think when we ask ourselves how we got here, obviously I do think part of the reason is what I described earlier, which is that Brazilian elites in the media and oligarchs and in the political world grew exhausted from trying to do what they've been trying to do without success for 20 years, which is beat the Workers' Party at the ballot box, and just decided to give up on democracy. And I think that they thought that impeaching Dilma and then imprisoning Lula was going to end up elevating into office someone who never could have gotten elected on his own, but it was the person that they actually wanted to win, which was Geraldo Alckmin, or at least somebody from PSDB. And instead they got this Frankenstein that on some level they deserve, but unfortunately it's all the rest of us who are suffering. So I think that part of it is the fact that an anti-democratic mentality was deliberately manufactured by Brazilian elites who had decided that they needed to get rid of PT, but recognized they could never beat, especially Lula, but the Workers' Party in general at the ballot box. But I think that we also have to be careful not to blame everybody else. I think, for example, you see in the US a lot of times there's an argument that Donald Trump won because the US is racist and his voters are racist and xenophobic and misogynistic, and obviously some of them are, a good number of them are, but it is still the same country that twice elected Barack Obama. And so you have to ask yourself, how is it that the same country that just did that in 2008 and 2012 turned around in 2016 and suddenly overnight became an overwhelmingly fascist and racist country? I don't find that very persuasive. I think The answer is that the establishment class has failed a large portion of the population in the United States, and therefore they were willing to embrace anybody, first Barack Obama and then Donald Trump, who could successfully depict themselves as outsiders. And I think that's very much the same thing as has happened in Brazil. There is an epidemic of failure on the part of the establishment class. People look at Brazil and think, oh, this Workers' Party is a left-wing party, left-wing politics has dominated Brazil, but that's really not the case. Although they occupied the presidency, they certainly didn't occupy the Congress, and Brazilian oligarchs and Brazilian neoliberals and centrist corrupt parties wielded huge amounts of power that forced the prevailing ideology to be the same one as it was in the US, which was this kind of neoliberalism, the idea that we ought to attend to the needs of the richest and forget everybody else. And when that happens, I do think we end up driving the population into the arms of anybody who can successfully channel hatred for elites and depict themselves as the enemy of a political system which millions and millions and millions of people in the world or in the country with good reason have come to hate. So just like I don't accept it in the US, I don't accept that the reason Bolsonaro won is because Brazil overnight became a fascist, racist, xenophobic, homophobic country. Obviously, that explains some of Bolsonaro's support, but not 56%. I think that there has been a real failure on the part of the establishment class, on the part of a greedy oligarchy, on the part of the economic class, and certainly on the part of the still dominant big media, that accompanying their dismantling of democratic values and the democratic institution through the impeachment of Dilma, through the use of Sergio Moro, and then finally the imprisonment of Lula and the removal of him from the race because of fear that he would win, also did enough damage to Brazilian democracy, failed enough Brazilians that Bolsonaro, as this primitive demagogue, was able successfully to channel that hatred and anger that people were justifiably feeling. And though he was a complete fraud about it, because he's obviously no outsider, he was able to successfully pose as one, just as Donald Trump was, and end up winning. And I think until we start grappling with the fundamental evils of this ideology of neoliberalism or oligarchy or whatever you want to call it, that breeds massive income and wealth inequality, that destroys opportunity for hundreds of millions of people while serving the interest of a tiny number of people, until we grapple with the evils of that ideology, not just in Brazil, but around the world, we're going to have so many more Brexits and Marine Le Pen's and Donald Trump's and Jair Bolsonaro's. And I think it's really incumbent upon us not to take the easy course of just calling everybody who votes the way we don't like racist and bigots, but to ask those hard questions about how to compete, to construct a competing ideology.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Glenn. We're going to go to the last question, but we in some ways have talked about it, but we're going to go there anyway. I think Glenn began to touch on an answer to this, but we're seeing the rise of authoritarianism now throughout the world: US, UK, Russia, Italy, Philippines, India, Hungary. It's important to understand what were the key factors in the rise of the right, which we've talked about, but what could have been done to stop it? And how do we strengthen democracy at this very perilous moment? Do you want to start?
É bem importante como fortalecer a democracia. E para fortalecer a democracia não está algo do lado de fora, está algo do lado de dentro. É impossível fortalecer a democracia sem fortalecer o nosso corpo, sem fortalecer a luta, sem acreditar que realmente os movimentos sociais é um quarto poder. Nós, povos indígenas, temos refletido profundamente que nós via a salvação no poder legislativo, o poder executivo, o poder judiciário, mas se a gente não entender a potência da luta como um quarto poder, nós não vamos conseguir salvar a democracia. E nesse momento é importante entender que para salvar a democracia é também salvar a vida, porque o momento que nós vivemos hoje no Brasil é um genocídio. E as pessoas falam, mas essa palavra é muito grave. Onde é que vocês estão vendo as pessoas morrendo coletivamente? E eu falo, não, eu errei. Não é um genocídio. É um genocídio legislado, é um etnocídio legislado, é um ecocídio legislado e é um fascismo legislado. Porque é o aparato do Estado autorizando nos matar.
I will try this. So it's important to understand that to save democracy, we need to look, not to look at the outside, but to look at the inside, to look at our bodies, to look at our struggles. We indigenous people, we believe that we are the salvation of the world. We believe that to save democracy, we need to think collective with the social movements. We need to think collective as our common struggles. We are currently facing a genocide in Brazil, and people always ask me, this is such a hard word. Why are you saying genocide? People are not dying collectively. But I want to tell you that this is a legislative genocide. This is a legislative ethnocide.
Não tem como pensar em salvar a democracia se pelo menos a gente não salvar a nossa história. E é preciso entender que no Brasil, enquanto nós não reconhecemos que a dívida histórica com os povos indígenas, afro, quilombola e toda a população da diversidade é muito maior do que a diversidade ou a dívida externa, nós não vamos conseguir também salvar a democracia. É preciso reconhecer essa dívida histórica.
It's not possible to save democracy if we don't save our own history, if we don't save the history of indigenous people, if we don't save the history of the Black Brazilians.
Esse totalitarismo, por que isso? Por que continuar pensando o projeto homogêneo de sociedade? Porque, na verdade, o que eles têm medo mesmo é da potência da diversidade.
So why to think about a very homogeneous project of society? Because people are afraid of diversity and of have a diverse society.
Porque a primeira munição desse atual governo, no dia 1º de janeiro, foi para os povos indígenas.
The first thing that this current government did on the first day was against indigenous people.
No dia 6 de janeiro, foram 19 lideranças indígenas assassinadas.
On January 6, 19 indigenous leaders were assassinated.
Porque o dia que arrancar o direito territorial dos povos indígenas, vai arrancar o direito de todo mundo.
When they take the land, our right to land, to our ancestral land, then you are taking the rights of everybody else.
A primeira munição foi para nós, povos indígenas. A segunda e a terceira foi de mão dupla, porque foi para as populações tradicionais, populações quilombola, LGBT. Porque o dia que matar a diversidade, o que sobra no Brasil?
So the first shot was against indigenous people. Then the others came against traditional communities, what we call quilombolas. Black Brazilians.
A quinta, a sexta munição foi para a educação, para a cultura, para todo o ativismo. Então é importante pensar que ter o atual governo como inimigo, precisa pensar o que nós temos as estratégias de luta. Nós povos indígenas falamos que nós somos o inimigo mais engraçado, nós somos o inimigo número 1 e não faz questão de ser o inimigo número 2.
We indigenous people have a saying, we are the number 1 enemy of the state, but we don't care about being the number 2.
Porque o projeto que ele tem para o Brasil não pode nem sequer ser chamado de projeto. É uma execução da vida, é uma execução da humanidade. E por isso nós precisamos continuar sendo o inimigo número 1.
Because the project that Bolsonaro has to Brazil is not a real project.
E para finalizar, por isso que é o ataque à cultura, à diversidade, à arte, à música. E esse governo, uma das ameaças principais foi acabar com o Ministério da Cultura. Mas eu disse que esse governo jamais vai conseguir acabar com o nosso Ministério da Cultura.
one of the. I'm so sorry. I was not able to translate many parts because I didn't want to interrupt her. So she's saying that one of the main things that the government trying to do is to close the Ministry of Culture. But this is one of the things that we were not going to allow.
Caetano wrote many years ago a song called Rotten Powers, which I think is very prophetic of what is happening in Brazil today. And one of the lines of the song says, "While men exercise their rotten powers to die and kill of hunger, hate, and thirst are so many times natural gestures. Will we do nothing but to confirm the incompetence of the Catholic America that will always need such ridiculous tyrants?" Here we are again, confirming the incompetence of the Catholic and Christian America with its ridiculous tyrants. And I agree with Glenn that this was not made by some crazy minority, fascist minority, but by a very concerted elite that in many places around the world is tired of democracy and rule of law and has determined and decided that money can get into power quickly by disrespecting the rules of the game, be it through fake news, be it through subverting social media, be it through the use of lawfare. What I most learned in this process was through this book called How Democracies Die by Levitsky and Ziblatt, because the conundrum that made me lost in the labyrinth of Alice in Wonderland in Brasilia was always the answer, oh, but Dilma's impeachment is constitutional, or Lula's prison is constitutional, it is in the Constitution. What Ziblatt and Levitsky say very clearly is that the Constitution is not enough to preserve any democracies. Before democracies died with men with guns and tanks occupying the Congress and TV stations, today they die through the Constitution, through the subversion of the Constitution, what they call constitutional hardballing, which is to make, in Brazil's case, an impeachment when there was no ground for impeachment, or to imprison a president, an ex-president, while he was the front runner in the election without actually having the crime, and with concerted efforts between the judge and the prosecutor, which in any other country would have the judge in jail by this moment. So, how do we deal with the pain of being thrown into a future that is more painful than our darkest past? How do we deal with this constitutional hardballing? How do we reclaim democracy? I think it is very inspiring for me to see young women, women of color, occupying the Congress, running for president. I think that we have to occupy these spaces. It's not possible that in Brazil, the majority of congressmen continue to be white men. So my only hope is that the youth will continue to run. I mean, please, let's occupy the Congress. Here and in Brazil, it's the only path forward. We cannot be the silent majority anymore.
Thank you. Thank you, Petra. Glenn, do you want to respond? Hope you're on. Almost, not there yet. Try it now.
So I thought I had learned the lesson that in order to speak to an audience, you have to turn your microphone on, but apparently I hadn't. So hopefully that'll be the last time. I, obviously think that it's very tempting and easy to be pessimistic about the future of Brazilian democracy. How can you not be in one sense when there is a president who has spent the last 30 years singing the praises of the military regime that caused so much suffering on the part of people like Caetano and Petra's parents and so many other people who I know personally and who I don't know because they're not with us anymore, and whose family is so closely tied to some of the most psychopathic and violent militias and gangs in Brazil. That's obviously a very dark picture. And when you add to that the movement of hatefulness that is propelling him and the government filled with either extremely evil intentioned people or people who are clownishly inept or sometimes both, it's easy to give in to sentiments of pessimism. But I actually look at things much differently. I genuinely don't feel pessimism about the future of Brazil. And I don't just say that to be encouraging or rosy-eyed. It's because it's true. I would actually say that I feel more optimistic about the future of Brazil, not despite Jair Bolsonaro, but I would almost say because of him, than I have in many years. And I would analogize it to the situation in the United States, where upon Donald Trump's election, for very similar reasons, people were terrified that the Trump presidency would pose this existential threat to US democracy. And I actually think that US democracy is stronger and more vibrant now than it's been in many years, probably decades, because so many institutions that were dormant and had relinquished their functions and duties under both Presidents Bush and Obama are now suddenly reactivated, including the media and the judiciary, and to some extent Congress, and most importantly of all, citizen activism. And I see a lot of the same thing happening in Brazil as a response to Bolsonaro, where a lot of those same institutions that had been more or less stagnant or working toward undesirable outcomes for many years are suddenly revitalized and rediscovering their purpose. And a lot of my views about how politics function and how the future is something that we should think about was informed by my work with Edward Snowden. In 2013 or late 2012, when Edward Snowden first contacted me, and we spent months talking before I actually met him, I had no idea who he was. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know his name. I didn't know where he worked. I didn't know his age. And he had told me the only thing I knew about him was that he had millions of extremely sensitive and secretive documents from the world's most powerful government that he was willing to go to jail for the rest of his life in order to expose to the world. So I assumed this kind of picture in my head that he was 60 or 70 years old. And when I met him in Hong Kong and I found this kid, at the time he was 29, but he looked much younger, I was shocked and very disoriented. And I spent days principally trying to understand what would motivate a 29-year-old to risk the rest of his life. And he had a life full of external and material happiness. He had a good job where he would make a lot of money. He had a girlfriend who he loved and who loved him, and a family that was very embracing and supportive. And ultimately, what he told me was that he couldn't confront and discover the grave injustices that he saw and live the rest of his life knowing that he had the chance to do something about it, but instead, out of fear or selfishness, chose to do nothing. That whatever they could do to him, put him in prison, kill him, destroy his reputation, that would not be as bad as the pain of having to live for the rest of his life knowing that he failed to act in the face of government abuse. And the reason it's so remarkable and has shaped my views to this day is because Edward Snowden was a very ordinary person. He grew up poor. He never finished high school. His father was in the Coast Guard for 30 years. He never traveled. He had no economic privilege. And what he taught me is that any human being, no matter how seemingly ordinary, can confront and ultimately undermine even the most seemingly invulnerable and impenetrable institutions as long as they summon the right passion and conviction and will. It taught me that any citizen can really change the world, which is what he did. He changed how people think about abuse of power and the right of privacy and the role of journalists in a democracy. And when I look at Brazil, I get inspired by so many of the same examples, not just the people who risked their life and liberty against the Brazilian democracy and to usher in redemocratization, but also people now. I mean, I remember as though it was yesterday, one of the worst and most horrific days of my life on March 14th of 2018, when at 10 o'clock at night, I was home here and my husband got a call and started screaming and wailing and sobbing. And it took 10 minutes for him to tell me, to be able to articulate the words about what he just heard. And he finally told me that one of his best friends in life, the person he sat next to every day in the Câmaras of Vereadores of Rio de Janeiro, Marielle Franco, had been murdered, assassinated. And I remember for the next week, every day that we went to events, the energy that I felt and saw was one of, it wasn't inspiring. It was actually very alarming. It was an energy of defeat and resignation and terror and fear. And that was the first time I really feared for the future of Brazilian democracy since I've been here. And then after about a week, I watched as that energy changed radically. The shock and the fear and the sadness transformed into anger, and then that anger transformed into determination and resolution. And then after 2 weeks, I saw things that I had never seen before, which was not just protest with huge numbers of Black women from the favela, but protests being led by Black women from the favela in the name of Marielle. And then 3 months later, I saw 3 Black women from the favela who worked in her cabinet who said, we're not going to hide in fear. We're instead going to do exactly the opposite. We're going to put our feet forward and our chests forward. And in the name of Marielle and the causes for which she so valiantly fought, we're going to run for the Allergy, the State Assembly of Rio de Janeiro, filled with members of the militia who had murdered Marielle, and all 3 of them, Renata Souza, Monica Francisco, and Dani Montero, won and now occupy that office. And you see this all over Brazil, the indigenous movement reacting to the burning of the Amazon, independent media arising in the wake of the threat Bolsonaro poses to a free press, civic institutions and brave and courageous people all over Brazil reacting to the menace that the Bolsonaro family poses to this very young and fragile but extremely vibrant and diverse Brazilian democracy. And when I look at that, I understand the impulse to say Brazilian democracy is imperiled, just like I understand the impulse to say that the US democracy is imperiled by Trump. But I genuinely believe that the future of the country, of my husband and of my children, and really of me, is brighter than ever. Because sometimes we all need reminding of how precious these things are that we can easily take for granted. And I think Bolsonaro, for all of his horrible darkness, has made us reflect on that, has made us think about that, has made us find the courage in ourselves to do what Edward Snowden did, to do what the Somenchis of Marielle did, to do what so many of you have done, what so many people like Caetano did during the dictatorship, which is find the courage in us, which in turn becomes contagious, which inspires other people to stand up far more robustly and energetically than ever before in defense of our freedoms and our sense of equality and the right of everybody to live free and prosperous lives. And I see that every single day in Brazil, and it gives me more hope than ever.
listening to what Glenn was saying, I was thinking that many times I heard recently people saying that Brazilians are conservative people. And I have always reacted against this idea, and I would answer with a question: what people is not conservative? Because a society always has to be up to a point conservative, because it tries to conserve itself and the values upon which they are founded. So I think that many things that are happening in the world now are a kind of response to the wave of liberation that grew so much all over the world in many ways, in different ways. You can talk about counterculture and counterculture, hippies, or rock and roll, or the vagina, or the growth of China, and that rhyme. So the reaction to this combination of things would be inevitable, and we just have to face it, in a way that must find itself the most efficient and realistic. And as I told you, realism for me is being sure that the kingdom of the Holy Spirit is coming, and that Brazil has a great role in that script.
We have compiled the questions from the audience into the one question below, although I think we have touched on an answer, but I'll let anybody jump in. What will it take to rebuild Brazil's democracy as envisioned by the 1988 Constitution and Brazil's international prestige? How can you articulate that with the following themes: technology, video, and mass communications impacting social movements in Latin America, lawfare and democracy, art censorship, and patriarchy? Does somebody could just grab a piece and speak to that? Anybody want to jump in? Glenn, do you want to? Were you waving your hand? Did you?
Oh, yeah, I didn't hear the question well, so can someone repeat that for me?
Yes. What will it take to rebuild Brazil's democracy as envisioned by the 1988 Constitution and Brazil's international prestige? How can you articulate that with the following themes: technology, video, mass communications impacting social movements in Latin America, lawfare and democracy, art censorship, and patriarchy? And maybe you could just bite off one of those themes.
So I think it relates to what I was saying in the prior answer, which is that I really do think there are a lot of avenues for Brazilian democracy to be secured, notwithstanding the threats that are obviously posed to it. And I see a lot of evidence for it already. I mean, on one level, I'm tempted to say that all we really need to do is just sort of step back and let the Bolsonaro movement destroy itself, because essentially that's what they're doing. It's very easy to be united when you have a common enemy that you can just unite together in hatred of, which is essentially what the far right in Brazil has been doing for the past however many years. The Bolsonaro movement had no ideas, it had no ideology other than very crude things like let's kill more people in favelas as a solution to crime, let's stigmatize LGBTs and make them afraid as a way of restoring public morality. But even that was more of an expression of hatred than it was a political program. And that kind of hatred can be unifying when you're not in power, when all you have to do is throw rocks at people that you hate. And the Bolsonaro movement is very good at that. But they suddenly have found themselves in power now with the ability to wield power and with the responsibility to prove that they're improving the lives of the people who voted for them. And they're obviously, needless to say, totally incapable of doing that. And now that they don't really have a common enemy anymore because their enemies have been vanquished, Dilma has been impeached, Lula is in prison, I think they're hoping Lula gets out of prison so they have someone that they can again hate and find unity around, but it's not going to work because they're still in power. You're seeing that what happens when a movement that's full of nothing but contempt and anger and bitterness and resentment and hatred has to actually govern, which is that they start turning on one another because they don't really have any shared values or any shared ideology once you remove the people that they've been trained to hate. So part of me does think that this implosion that we're seeing within PSL and within the broader far right part within the far right movement on some level is probably going to end up being sufficient to cripple and paralyze them. It's at least entertaining to watch. And I think probably pretty fatal. But I actually think that if I've never thought that Jair Bolsonaro is the greatest danger to Brazilian democracy, just like I don't think Donald Trump is. I think they both have the capacity to be effective demagogues and to channel hatred in an effective way. But the kinds of hatreds and resentments that they're tapping into are very powerful ones. And on some level, we're very lucky, both in the US and in Brazil, that the first leader to have successfully channeled all of that hatred and anger and to seize power based on it are both incredibly not just inept and pretty ineffective, but actually have very little interest in politics, very little interest in governing. What I fear, both in the US and in Western Europe and definitely in Brazil, is that somebody far more effective, far more capable, taps into that same level of hatred, but without things like mocking the physical appearance of the French president's wife or constantly talking about defecating. Because that actually can become a serious danger. I don't think Bolsonaro is able to do anything other than lay the foundation for it. But even having said all that, you know, I think that somebody like Sergio Moro, for example, poses a much greater danger to Brazilian democracy because he is a Bolsonarista. I think that's been unmasked completely, and he would be far more capable in implementing the kind of policy that Bolsonaro is incapable of doing. But having said all that, I do genuinely believe that sometimes the population needs a danger or a threat in order to be awakened. And I think that there's all kinds of options and paths that we have available to us in order to do that. I mean, the internet, for example, gives voice to huge numbers of people who never previously had one. I always thought that the most interesting and important part of the Snowden story was that for the first time in many decades, a critical national security leak didn't go to the New York Times or the Washington Post, which Snowden desperately and deliberately avoided, but came instead to independent journalists like myself and Laura Poitras, because he knew that we would both have an independent mentality, but be able to have a huge impact by using the internet and by using tools at our disposal. And now, one of the biggest leaks, if not the biggest leak in the history of Brazilian democracy, the biggest mass leak, which is Vaza Jato, also didn't go to Globo or to Estadão or to Record, but it came to a media outlet that didn't exist until 3 years ago and that most Brazilians until June had never heard of, because the source in our case wanted it to be both done by independent journalists, but also somebody who would have the power to be able to reach huge numbers of people and have a big impact, which the internet now lets you do. You can emancipate yourself from Globo and from Estadão and from Veja and have the ability to communicate with huge numbers of people. All of these changes, along with, I think for the first time, and this is really the most important change of Lula, is the expectation on the part of people who for generations were trained just to accept their own hopelessness, their own powerlessness, their own lack of opportunity, just to meekly come to terms with the fact that they would never wield power. Under Lula, because of the improvements in their lives, they decided for the first time that no, they don't have to accept their own powerlessness. They don't have to accept their own hopelessness. They aren't destined to live lives of deprivation while a tiny number of people prosper. And I think that this spirit that is now embedded in Brazilian culture and in the wider Brazilian populace, as a result of the transformation that Lula ushered in for tens of millions of Brazilians, holds the key for defending Brazilian democracy and defending the values that we all think are the linchpin of a free and just society. And I think that, again, that's the reason I have so much optimism. Because I see huge numbers of Brazilian people who never used to have a voice, who were trained to believe that they had no role to play, demanding a voice, demanding the right to occupy spaces that had always been off limits to them. And it may take some time. It may take some persuading. It'll probably take a lot of risk-taking and a lot of courage and a lot of collective action. But the reason I fell in love with Brazil in the first place isn't because of beautiful, glamorous beaches in Ipanema or the festivities of Carnival. It was because I've always seen within the Brazilian spirit and the Brazilian population this enormous potential that was just waiting to unleash. And I think it very well may be the case that it takes somebody like Jair Bolsonaro and the incredibly hateful movement that propels him to finally awaken and finally unleash that energy. And I don't think it is pie in the sky. I think we're seeing lots of evidence of it all the time. And we now have the tools as the result of the internet, as a result of political organizing and leadership on the part of huge numbers of groups that never previously were organized, examples to follow, tools to use, and an amazing energy to tap into. And it gives me so much hope, because I do think that's the path that will ultimately safeguard, but also strengthen Brazilian democracy for many years to come.
Thank you so much. I want to say that Glenn has to sign off now. And before he goes, I just want to personally thank you, Glenn, for being so brilliant, so intrepid, so constant, such a fighter for all of us, for truth, for true journalism, and for just being the amazing person you are. Thank you so much. We're going to finish answering the question. We only have a few more minutes, because then we have a special treat that I know you've all been waiting for. Célia is going to answer the question on patriarchy. Petra is going to talk democracy, and Caetano is going to answer on art censorship.
Já que nós precisamos fortalecer que tudo isso, o ataque à democracia, não vem exatamente de matriz colonizadora, mas de patriz colonizadora.
So we need to understand that what is the threatening to democracy is patriarchy. So we are talking in a Portuguese term to say that it's not related to women, but it's related to men.
Minha avó diz que não se pode curar o mal com a mesma enfermidade. Se a enfermidade é o patriarcado, vai ser exatamente as mulheres também que vai se desfazer esse mal.
We cannot cure the disease with itself. Patriarchy will not heal itself. So we need women to heal the society.
E as pessoas perguntam se nós estamos com medo desse momento. Eu estou como Glenn também acreditando muito nesse momento, porque nós acreditamos que é o remédio amargo é o que cura.
So I agree with Glenn. I believe that this is a very important moment, and I am optimist. And I believe that it's not a tasty drug, but I do believe that this is the cure.
Nós realizamos a primeira marcha das mulheres indígenas e as pessoas insistiam em perguntar se nós estávamos com medo.
So when we were doing the first Women's Indigenous March, people insisted asking, "You are not scared? Why you are not scared?"
E nós dizia que nós tem medo mesmo é de permanecer viva sem poder dizer quem a gente é.
But our real fear is to be alive without saying who we really are.
E realizar a primeira marcha das mulheres indígenas junto com a marcha das Margaridas foi uma resposta também a esse governo de dizer que vão ver quantas fraquejadas se derruba o fascismo.
So our march was in partnership with the Margaritas March, and is the answer to said, you will see that we will defeat fascism in Brazil.
Mas é importante também ainda provocar que não basta apenas nos apoiar dizendo que vai nos apoiar exatamente na sustentação da luta. Nós, mulheres indígenas, precisamos ocupar os espaços institucionais para além do chão do território.
So it's important to understand that we need to occupy the spaces, but go beyond our own territory. We need to occupy legislative spaces and other political spaces as well.
Há 20 dias atrás, quando o atual governo fazia o discurso aqui também na ONU, é impressionante. Eles são contra as mulheres, mas eles trazem mulheres também para fazer a sua sustentação na luta.
During the UN General Assembly, I was so amazed that the government fights against women, but they brought one woman to present the idea about their own project.
E o ataque que ele fez, o discurso dele na ONU, é muito revelador e a coragem que ele tem. E as pessoas perguntavam, vocês não estão com medo? E nós dizíamos, nós estamos com vergonha.
So people ask me during the president's speech, you are not afraid of the things that he's saying. And I said, no, I'm ashamed.
E o primeiro ataque dele foi a primeira mulher. E se nós perguntar qual foi a primeira mulher que o atual governo atacou, foi a Mãe Terra.
And if we think, who was the first woman that this government attacked? And the answer is, it was the Mother Earth.
E depois ele traz uma indígena exatamente para tentar também nos dividir na luta. E as pessoas falam, mas então vocês povos indígenas estão divididos? E aí Joênia Wapichana, a nossa deputada federal, diz, não, estão tentando nos dividir.
And when he brought an indigenous woman, the strategy was to send the message that we are being divided. But the answer is no, they are trying to divide us.
Mas nós vamos seguir lutando em defesa da vida, em defesa da Amazônia. Vamos lançar uma campanha importante, percorrer 12 países.
So we will keep fighting. We're fighting for the earth. We're fighting for the Amazon. We are starting now an international campaign. We are going to 12 countries.
Sangue indígena, nem uma gota a mais. Sangue indígena, nem uma gota a mais.
Indigenous blood. Not one more drop of indigenous blood. Thank you so much.
E se perguntar quem somos nós, pode dizer que nós somos a que retomamos a terra roubada, porque direito é aquilo que se arranca quando não tem mais escolha. Nesse momento nós estamos sendo alvo de muita coisa, mas ele esqueceu da nossa grande capacidade de ser flecha.
So if you ask who are we are the one fighting for the land. Yeah, that's a very typical. Does someone know how to say flecha in English?
Arrow.
So we are the arrow. Thank you.
We have 2 more minutes.
Amy Goodman, who is sitting here, I heard her speak a few years after 9/11, and I remember she said 9/11 was the day that the United States helped back the coup in Chile that killed thousands of people. It was beautiful to hear that and to have us, Latin American countries, eternally subjugated to the role of being colony, remembered in the United States by such an inspiring woman. I think today we're living something very similar in different guise, in different dress, and many thought, a few said, that Lula was one of the first leaders that managed to exert and establish himself as a world leader through soft power. It seemed for long that it was possible for Brazil to leave its colonial subjugation and establish itself as a world power through soft power. But it's not that simple. We're back to a position of colony, and I want to be optimistic, but I still do not see how we're going to leave that position. Especially with the rise of evangelical, at the time of the Constitution, there was 1 evangelical congressman in Brazil. Today, there are 200. So, how is it going to happen? I don't know. It depends on the effort of each one of us. That's all, the only certainty I have.
So, as for censorship and art, in 1968, the military dictatorship was already in power for 4 years. But censorship over songs, films, and theater plays was not strong or really, not really working. They were not doing that yet. But in '68, there was this institutional act number 5. Yes, AI 5. And they started with censorship on art creation. In my case, Gilberto Gil and I, we were not censored. We were put in prison. 14 days after the act, we were put in prison, and we stayed 2 months in prison, 4 months home arrested, and 2.5 years in exile. And when I came back to Brazil from exile, the censorship was still there, and the guy who was responsible for that thing in Bahia, when I went there to sing my new songs, I had a song in English that went, I walk down Portobello Road to the sound of reggae. I was invited to go to the federal police station to explain what the word reggae meant. Because it was not known yet. If I didn't, they would not allow my concert to be staged. And I said, well, it's a rhythm, it's a new thing from Jamaica. He said, how can I believe you? How can you prove? I have looked every dictionary, and I didn't find it, not even in slang dictionaries. I said, but it's not in a dictionary, because it's a new thing, it's a new rhythm. In the end, he said, okay, I'll give you, you know, my confidence. If I find out afterwards that it's a subversive word, I'll put you in prison again. That was the first dialogue with censorship that I had after I had been put in prison and everything. And after that, they censored a few songs of mine. One that said to a woman that she had a cow's eyes. Cow's eyes. She had eyes like a cow's. And they cut it. I wrote it for my sister Maria Bethânia to record, and they cut it. Even it was already recorded, and they obliged people in the recording company to cut that part, and the song went with that, you know, silence in the middle. It's there without the phrase, without that line. But people like Chico Buarque, they were censoring everything he wrote. Yeah, he wrote wonderful lyrics. Some were explicitly against the oppression, but some weren't. But they would, you know, they just were crazy about him. And many theater plays were censored, and one of them was like a group of anti-communist guys went to the theater, and they, in fact, beated and maltreated actors and stopped the show. And by chance, the play had been written by Chico Buarque. So nowadays, we don't have a dictatorship. They don't have this possibility of acting, ignoring the laws and everything. So they are sabotaging, but explicitly. The president himself said that the banks, the national banks, the banks that belong to the state, are not going to back films that cope with LGBT themes, or, you know, things that are against our Christian tradition. So it's already put as censorship in a different level. That's what is going on. That's what I know, and I'll tell you that films in Brazil, in fact, banks, state banks, back film productions, but films are something that, you know, pay. They pay well, and audiovisual art in Brazil pays very well. Daniel is here, won't let me lie.
Thank you.
That's all I know.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to say, I know what you've all been waiting for, and that's going to happen next. But before I stop, I just want to say, I don't know about all of you, but I feel so moved and privileged and changed and transformed by the conversation we've heard tonight. And I want to thank Petra and Célia and Caetano and Glenn for really representing the best parts of human beings, the parts of us we all want to rise to. And I want to urge all of you to see Petra's film, Edge of Democracy, because it's utterly brilliant and important. And I want to just say that we are at a critical moment in human consciousness and human evolution. We're really going to go one way or the other. But the thing to really hold on to is that we are the many. We are the many. And we have a huge imagination, huge artistry, huge love, huge potential in our hearts that is now being called to release. So enjoy Caetano, who is about to sing for us. Please celebrate all of these people and thank them for being here tonight.
Já sentado. Tá.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Guys.
Agradece, fala que você vai no banheiro e volta, só para eles saberem. Você vai cantar as musiquinhas.
Oh,
I'll
this
be
is
back
beautiful.
in a minute, and I'll sing just 4 songs.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. Lula livre, Lula livre, Lula livre, Lula livre, Lula livre, Lula livre. These guys are amazing. You guys are amazing. Sorry.
Everyone's amazing here.
Yeah. Como você quer que eu introduza? Como você quer? E aí? Guys, whoa, that was a amazing one. Intense, I would say. Glenn's words were pretty strong, but where is Célia on the backstage? Come on. She knows how to twist Portuguese in a completely different way. I love it. I was pitied by the with pity of the girl that was translating for her. That's a tough one. But still, guys, are you excited? Come on. Caetano is about to come up. I have to kind of keep talking to you guys. Have no idea what to do in here. I wanna shout out to Gabriel. What is he? Amazing words, my friend. Amazing words. You are incredible. You are incredible. You are incredible. And now you are all looking to me, and I have like no idea what to say. So, sing a song, Lula Livre. Truly, I was talking to. I'm gonna just start telling stories in here. How was my day? I wasn't going with this one. I was actually going with. I was listening to Célia Sunday night, talking to Caetano about her views of the world, and it's one of those things. Truly an amazing experience because she was just telling her stuff, and they go and telling like a regular stuff of her day, and it's pretty amazing how. In the way that she brings it, she has this poem way of doing these things, but it came to a point that we were like 5 white people staring to her, completely astonished of how the perception of how she views Earth. Yes. Caetano, come on. Guys, with you guys, Caetano Veloso. Você precisa de desse? Good night, guys. Let's enjoy it, guys. Caetano singing. Okay.
Índio descerá de uma estrela colorida, brilhante, de uma estrela que virá numa velocidade estonteante. e pousará no coração do hemisfério sul, na América, num claro instante. Depois de exterminada a última nação indígena, e o espírito dos pássaros, das fontes de água límpida, mais avançado que a mais avançada das mais avançadas das tecnologias, virá impávido que nem Muhammad Ali, virá que eu vi apaixonadamente como Peri, virá que eu vi tranquilo e infalível como Bruce Lee, virá que eu vi o axé do apogé, filhos de Gandhi, virá um índio preservado em pleno corpo físico, em todo sólido, todo gás e todo líquido, em átomos, palavras, alma, cor, em gesto, em cheiro, em sombra, em luz, em som magnífico, num ponto equidistante entre o Atlântico e o Pacífico. Do objeto, sim, resplandecente, descerá o índio. E as coisas que eu sei que ele dirá, fará, não sei dizer assim, de um modo explícito. Virá que nem Muhammad Ali, virá que eu vi tranquilo e infalível como Bruce Lee, virá que eu vi apaixonadamente como Peri, virá que eu vi o axé do apogé, filhos de Gandhi, virá, e aquilo que nesse momento se revelará aos povos surpreenderá a todos, não por ser exótico, mas pelo fato de poder ter sempre estado oculto, quando terá sido o óbvio. Muito obrigado. Pois é, essa foi para Célia. Luz do sol que a folha traga e traduz em verde novo, em folha, em graça, em vida, em força, em luz. Céu azul que vem até onde os pés tocam a terra, e a terra inspira e exala seus azuis. Reza, reza o rio, córrego pro rio, rio pro mar. Reza a correnteza, roça, beira, doura, areia. Marcha o homem sobre o chão, leva no coração uma ferida acesa. Dono do sim e do não, diante da visão da infinita beleza. Finda por ferir com a mão essa delicadeza, a coisa mais querida. A glória traduz em verde novo, em folha, em graça, em vida, em força, em luz. É a porra da árvore. O que mais que eu queria cantar? Quando eu me encontrava preso na cela de uma cadeia, foi que eu vi pela primeira vez as tais fotografias em que apareces inteira, porém lá não estavas nua, e sim coberta de nuvem. Terra, terra, por mais distante, o errante navegante, quem jamais te esqueceria. Ninguém supõe a morena dentro da estrela azulada, na vertigem do cinema. Mando um abraço pra ti, pequenina, como se eu fosse o saudoso poeta e fosses a Paraíba. Terra, terra, por mais distante, o errante navegante, quem jamais te esqueceria. De onde nem tempo nem espaço, que a força mande coragem pra gente te dar carinho durante toda a viagem que realizas no nada, através do qual carregas o nome da tua carne. Terra, terra, por mais distante, o errante navegante, quem jamais te esqueceria. Cantem. Terra, terra, por mais distante, o errante navegante, quem jamais te esqueceria. Mais uma vez para todo mundo cantar forte. Terra, terra, por mais distante, o errante navegante, quem jamais te esqueceria. Muito obrigado. Yo vi de una garza mora dándole combate a un río, Así es como se enamora tu corazón con el mío. Yo vi de una garza mora dándole combate a un río. Así es como se enamora, así es como se enamora tu corazón con el mío, tu corazón con el mío. Luna, luna, luna llena, menguante. Luna, luna, luna llena, menguante. Anda muchacho a la casa y me trae la carabina, hijo, pa' matar este gavilán que no me deja gallina, hijo. La luna me está mirando, yo no sé lo que me dé. Yo tengo la ropa limpia, ayer tarde la lavé. La luna me está mirando, yo no sé lo que me dé. Yo tengo la ropa limpia, yo tengo la ropa limpia, ayer tarde la lavé, ayer tarde la lavé. Luna, luna, luna llena, menguante. Luna, luna, luna llena, menguante. Ay, oh, ay, ay, ay. Luna llena, póngate. A tristeza é senhora, desde que o samba é assim. A lágrima clara sobre a pele escura, à noite a chuva que cai lá fora. Solidão apavora, tudo demorando em ser tão ruim. Mas alguma coisa acontece no quando agora em mim. Cantando eu mando a tristeza embora. O samba ainda vai nascer, o samba ainda não chegou. O samba não vai morrer, veja o dia ainda não raiou. O samba é pai do prazer, o samba é filho da dor, grande poder transformador. A tristeza é senhora, desde que o samba é assim. A lágrima clara sobre a pele escura, à noite a chuva que cai lá fora. Solidão apavora, tudo demorando em ser tão ruim. Mas alguma coisa acontece no quando agora em mim. Cantando eu mando a tristeza embora, quero ouvir. Cantando eu mando a tristeza embora, outra vez. Cantando eu mando a tristeza embora, só mais uma vez. Cantando eu mando a tristeza embora. Então agora eu vou cantar uma música em homenagem ao filme de Petra.